Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, it's your buddy Chewie, and I am joined by my brother from another mother, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
What is up, buddy? How you doing?
Good, man. How are things?
Things are good. Things are all right. Still way too damn cold for my liking outside, but I'm probably going to be bitching about that for the next 2 or 3 months at least. So guess I got to get
I,
used to that. But
I
yeah,
think
man, things are
in
good. Not as exciting as the city of Cleveland these days, though, huh? You got some stuff going on there that's worth talking about.
I tell you what, it has been yeah, it's been an awesome couple of weeks in Cleveland. I mean, my kids are my oldest is 14, and so he has no concept of what a winning Browns team actually is. So it's like he has
Right.
no idea. So it's been pretty cool to kind of experience with them. And if you watch that Steeler game, you blinked and they were up 28-0, which was just an awesome experience. So
Now, at halftime, when it was 28 to nothing, how nervous were you at that point that they would still blow that game?
a
Like,
100% nervous.
right. Like, so you
Yeah,
thought it was legitimately nowhere near being done at that point.
yes, absolutely. And sure enough, right, the Steelers come out and they score 13 unanswered points or whatever it was. Yes, I had absolutely zero level of comfort that game was over. None.
Yeah. Oh man, but what a great thing. And if all the teams in the league to beat, how about the Steelers, right? Like that was that tough at all for you? Because I mean, you grew up a Steelers fan,
I did,
for the
yeah,
most
I
part.
did. And it's funny, I even after I did grow up a Steelers fan. I grew up in Pittsburgh I've lived in Cleveland since I was about I moved to Cleveland right before I started kindergarten. So what, five? So I've been here the better part of 40 years. And I can honestly say for a long time, I still rooted for the Steelers.
Yeah.
And I can say though, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I'm a Browns fan first and foremost. I was rooting for the Browns, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so no, I was very very happy. And no, it wasn't hard at all because it was especially the way that game started. First snap and we're up 7-0, and so no, it was cool. I won't say I'm optimistic about this game this weekend. They're playing the Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champions. But I don't think it's as big of a lopsided game as it is maybe being portrayed. I mean, I think they absolutely can win that game. Do I think they're going to? Probably not, but I
Yeah.
think they absolutely can win that game.
Well, I sure hope they put up a good fight because it
Yeah.
would be great to see. Now, I have to admit, for my own selfish needs, I am hoping the Chiefs win only because I mean I would be happy if the Browns won, but the Chiefs have the best chance of knocking off the Patriots. Oh my God, the Bucks because I strongly feel like the Bucks are going to sneak their way into the Super Bowl this year just because I've learned not to bet against Tom Brady ever. Coincidentally or ironically, that's exactly what I've done is I bet against Tom Brady. I have a bet with my brother-in-law, Mark, that Tom Brady will not get another Super Bowl win in the league under a different team. I bet him 50
Ever or
bucks that
ever or just this year?
ever, like from this point forward, he will not
Okay.
win a Super Bowl ring. And it was a foolish bet, but I thought as soon as he left the Patriots, it would take him too long to start over again and assemble a team that would be a true contender. And here I am, not even a year later, getting ready to eat my words. So I think that Kansas City has the strongest chance to beat them. So, but I mean, they have to get through the Saints first, which isn't going to be easy. That's this weekend. But I
Yeah.
think they're going to do it. I got to be honest. I just think Brady's got that magic. He's going to find a way to get through it. And
And then they would have to beat what? They'd have to beat the winner of the it was the Green Bay and who?
Well, yeah. So Green Bay got a bye in the first round, I believe, and then Green Bay goes against who won the Seattle or no, yeah, whoever was it that
Oh, it was who beat Seattle. It was that's terrible that I don't
the
know.
Rams.
Yes, it was lost. Yes, the
Okay.
Rams.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, I think the Packers are gonna. I don't know if they're gonna get to. I want the Packers to get to the Super Bowl because I think the Packers and Chiefs would be a fun rematch if that's how it ended up. But
Yeah.
But ultimately, as long as Brady doesn't win, I don't care. The Browns could go all the way. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, you know what, that would be an interesting. Yeah, it would be. I mean, to say the Browns in the Super Bowl would be interesting is an understatement of just absolutely epic proportions. Obviously, they have never been there.
Right.
They've won league championships, but they've never, they've never even been to a Super Bowl in the Super Bowl era.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, we're obviously we're rooting for that. Fellow 406 alumni Jeff shot me a note today because he's a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan. So I imagine he and I will trade a couple of barbs over the next couple of days here.
That's right. I did see that. I did see that jab on Facebook, and I thought, oh, that'll go over well.
Yeah, I did see a funny meme today. It said, we're less than 2 weeks into the new year, and the United States Capitol has been raided. Civil war is currently trending on Twitter. Kanye West is hooking up with a dude, and the Cleveland Browns are 2 wins away from the Super Bowl. 2021 really said, hold my beer.
Yeah, no kidding. That's about as good as it can be described right there, for sure.
So, all right. Well, with the pleasantries out of the way, let's get into tonight's topic. I think it's fair to say it has proven to be a doozy to put together. It was for me. I'm assuming it was for you as well.
Oh, it was incredibly difficult. I mean, you took one of the most important things in the world to me, and maybe more important than my own children, and made me rank them. And well, I guess not rank, but at least pick my favorites, which is sort of the same thing. But yeah, tonight's topic is going to be our top 5 favorite albums. Again, favorites, not bests, because it's all art, it's all subjective. So we're just having fun with it. But top 5 favorite albums, with the stipulation that they can't be greatest hits albums. So it can't be cheating, because that very much is cheating. And they can't be repeat artists. So they have to be individual artists. You can't put Nickelback on there 4 times, which I know made that really hard for you. But you're just gonna have to come up with some other choices, I guess.
Yeah. So this was one of those. Again, Pip and I have been talking about doing this podcast for years. And this maybe not without the stipulations, but this is kind of always one of those things that kind of bubbles to the top of, hey, we should talk about our favorite albums. So for me, kind of the criteria that I use for a lot of these to kind of break ties and those kind of things is, albums that I can put in, whether it's on CD or an old school cassette, right, and just hit play and just not skip a song and listen to the whole thing from beginning to end. And the album as a whole is incredible. So that was kind of that's how I framed these. So
no, that's perfect. I mean, and that's how my list is built as well, in terms of, again, favorites. There's not a song on any of these albums. Well, actually, it's not true. There's one song on one of these albums that I actually can't stand, and I skip every time, which is really ironic. But we'll get there, and you may even be able to guess, because there's one album on here that you'll be able to nail from about 1,000 yards away. But the rest of them may be surprises. Hopefully, are surprises.
Okay. So did you? I know we didn't say we were going to. Did you rank them? Are you going to be giving them in any sort of rank order, or are you just saying, hey, here's 5?
I personally have decided to rank them, only because that's sort of, I don't know. I went into it thinking that's what we were going to do. And when I started doing, I couldn't not rank them. I guess my OCD just kind of kicked in, and I decided, well, I'd have to put these in some sort of order. So I will be reading them in order of the ranking, but it's also fair to say, much like the rest of our top 5 lists, like the orders of this can change quite frequently, because depending on what kind of mood you're in, or depending on what you've been listening to lately, like, these things change. And some of these albums that I have on my list, maybe I won't listen to for another couple months, and then I'll revisit it and remember how great it is and how much I love it. So it constantly changes.
Okay,
sure.
That's fair. That being said, I will also I will give mine in rank order as
Okay.
well.
All right. Well, you picked the topic, sir. So you start our list tonight.
Damn it. Okay.
No pressure.
So that being said, I'm going to start with number 5. It is let me just verify this before I say it. It is the newest album on my list.
Okay. And before you say anything else, what year is the newest album on your list?
2012.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's actually much better than I thought. And that's much newer than my newest album on the list.
Right. Yeah. So it is 2012. It was released on February 24th, 2012. It is an album called All the Little Lights by Passenger.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Passenger is, and it's going to be interesting as we go through these. You know, I consider myself, I love lyrical music. I love acoustic music. I love a lot of kind of folksy music, but I also like a lot of like hard rock, you know, old school. You know, obviously we've talked about ballads, we've talked about hair bands, you know, those kind of things. We've talked about Van Halen and those kind of things. But I think you'll see as we go through my lists are there's a lot of softer music, a lot of folksy type music, and almost to an album, they are really good lyrical albums as well. And that's, you know, that's just kind of the stuff that resonates with me. This is an album that, you know, it's probably not super well known. There's one song on here that, you know, got a lot of airplay. It's called Let Her Go. That particular song, I don't know where it ranked, but I mean, it was in a Super Bowl commercial. It was, I mean, that song was everywhere for a while. Passenger, this is actually the 4th studio album by Passenger. Again, he's just kind of an old school English, you know, he's got a really kind of heavy, thick English accent. You know, it's the kind of guy that you can, you know, you can really kind of imagine just sitting in a pub, right? A smoke-filled pub, just kind of singing his folk tunes. And it is an album, like I said, I put it in, I hit play, and I can just kind of disappear for the entire 12 tracks or whatever it is. It's only about 45 or 50 minutes long. But you know, and I listen to it a lot on road trips. I listen to it a lot at night. I listen to it when I'm kind of in a very introspective mood. And again, it's one of my favorite albums. It's probably the least well known of all the albums on my list. But in my mind, that doesn't make it any less special. It's a great album. I love it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I am familiar with their song that was on the radio, but I can't say I know too much about that. But it was a really it's funny you should say you should talk about his voice, because that's one of the lasting memories I have of that band, is that he has a very specific, very sort of thick accent or you know singing style that is definitely hard to forget. So that was that's really interesting.
Yeah. So all right. Number 5, sir. What do you got?
All right. Well, number 5, I'm bringing out the big balls right away. I much like you, and much because of you, I'm also a big fan of a lot of the slower acoustic music. But that didn't really make its way onto my list, with the exception of maybe one album. But this one isn't it. This album was released on August 3rd of 1987. It is by far my oof. I want to say it's my favorite album of the 80s. It's definitely one of the most successful albums of the 80s. And it spawned 7 singles, which to me to this day is still insane how impressive that is, especially back then. And this is Hysteria by Def Leppard. Def Leppard is one of those bands where people either really love them or really hate them, because they're the epitome of 80s hair band rock and roll, right? But the thing that I think really makes them stand out is the production behind the work that they did. The 7 singles: Pour Some Sugar on Me, Animal, Armageddon It, Hysteria, Rocket, Love Bites, and Women. I mean, just amazing that a band could release 7 singles off of an album back then. And it was very famously produced by Mutt Lange, who was who is meticulous with his work in the studio, with a lot of overdubs and a lot of sort of fancy sonic trickery. He did a lot of work with AC/DC and the Cars and Shania Twain, Huey Lewis, Maroon 5. So I mean, he's been all over the place. And his goal for this album is that he really wanted it to be the rock version of Thriller. Um, and this album was recorded shortly after drummer Rick Allen lost his arm in that near fatal car accident, which to me to this day I still think it's become a bit of a punchline to some extent. But the fact that there's a drummer out there with one arm and he's in a successful rock band is just fucking insane.
And
It's
he's a good fucking drummer too.
he is a good drummer. Now granted, he can't do the same things that other drummers with two working arms can do, but I mean, the fact that he designed his own kit after this accident, to allow him to be able to hit the same drums at the same times, but he's doing it with a combination of his feet and his right arm. It's insane. It's just amazing how that works.
Is that the first album that they recorded after that accident?
I believe so. Yes, that was the first full album, and then it was the last full album that would feature Steve Clark, who was the original guitar player in the band, who died of alcohol and drug abuse, unfortunately. But this album went platinum 12 times in the US, which means it sold over 12 million copies. And I mean, just it's you can't not hear it anywhere you go when you listen to 80s music. And I think it still sounds great. Like it's a very dated sound. So if you don't like electronic drums, like stay the hell away from this. But for my take, I won't stand on a pedestal and say it's brilliant songwriting, but just listening to all the layers of everything that they put together, and the sugary, poppy, bubblegum rock feel to it, it's just fantastic, and I love it. I don't think there's a better Def Leppard record album, and there's not a lot of better 80s records out there.
No, I would agree with that. It's an amazing. In fact, it was one of the ones that as I was going through my list, I'm like, man, I would really love to get an 80s rock album on here, right? And so I was like, so I toyed around. Do I put Def Leppard? Do I go with Bon Jovi, New Jersey? Like those, but this one absolutely crossed my mind. I mean, to me, the most iconic thing about that particular album is the video for "Pour Some Sugar on Me." It's that circular stage. Joe Elliott's got those ripped jeans. I mean, I think I haven't looked at the charts. I imagine that's the highest ranking single of that album. I would
probably
maybe Love Bites. I don't know.
It's easily the most successful single of their entire catalog. And the interesting thing about it is that I don't think it was the first single that they released, and the album didn't really take off until that single came out. And it wasn't in the UK either. It was America. America is the the ones that really launched Def Leppard into the mainstream rock zeitgeist, if you will. They really put them out there. So that was really interesting.
Do you have a favorite song off that album?
It probably, that's a great question. Damn, I wasn't prepared for that one. It probably changes. It's definitely not Pour Some Sugar on Me.
I was gonna say, for me, it's Armageddon. I love that tune.
I mean, oh man, that's tough. I think it's Armageddon, but honestly, you know which one I think it really is it's probably Rocket. I don't know why, but it's got that.
Yeah, it's got a good kick.
It's got that drum beat that just it makes you stand up and just kind of start grooving to it. I think Rocket is my favorite song, with Armageddon probably a close second. Yeah.
All right, cool. Good pick. All
right, give me your number 4.
My number 4 is from December 31st, 1991. It is a band. It's probably, I'm trying to think, this album is not super well known. It's actually a band that we saw together. It is Mental Jewelry by Live.
Oh, what did you say? December 31st?
Yes, of 1991.
And New Year's Eve. Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this is an album. I was actually introduced to this particular album. I went on a school trip to Spain after I graduated from high school. And about a week or 10 days before I left for that trip, a buddy of mine, actually Dan, who you've met, we were listening to this album, and I fell in love with it, and I bought it. I'm pretty sure Yeah, I bought it like the day or 2 days before I left, and I listened to that album, the entire, transcontinental flight over and the entire flight back, and just fell in love with it. I mean, I don't think it's got any. I think they released 3 or 4 songs. They released Operation Spirit. I'm pretty sure they released Beauty of Grey, which is probably the song that, if anybody knows this album other than live fans, that would probably be the one that they know. My favorite song on the album is called Mother Earth is a Vicious Crowd.
Hmm.
Again, it is, Ed Kowalczyk, who's the lead singer of Live. His voice is, in my mind, is kind of very pure. His lyrics tend to be very harsh. They tend to be very politically motivated, politically driven. He is, but again, I mean, I just love everything about this album. It's the album that introduced me to Live. It's certainly not their most critically acclaimed album. Obviously, that would be throwing Copper would be the next album where you got lightning crashes and those kind of things. But this is the one. If I have to listen to one live album, this is the one that I always go to.
I mean, yeah, that's that album. I remember seeing that for the first time. I think you were the first one that I knew Live from Throwing Copper before I think I really got to know you, but Mental Jewelry was the one that you introduced me to. And it's definitely sonically not as refined as their follow-up album for obvious reasons, but for a debut album in a band, I mean, it was fantastic. And I think Mirror Song's probably my favorite off of that
Mhm.
one. That one is a really good song, but Pain Lies by the Riverside is another one. I think that might be the other single that would have been released if I had to
Yep.
guess, because that was really popular. But I agree, there's not a bad song on that album, and it's really really good. And it was just a sign of things to come because that band would put out at least a couple more albums, in my opinion, of really really great songs. Um,
Yeah.
and that was fantastic. I did not know that was on New Year's Eve though. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's when it was released. I do find it kind of funny. So I was looking on Wikipedia. So Rolling Stone, they obviously rate every album that ever comes out, right? They,
Yeah.
they gave they gave that album 2 out of 5 stars, which I don't know. I find that hard to believe. I'm not suggesting it's a 5-star album, but I mean, especially based on what it launched for Live, I think that was really low in my book. So
It's low, but I think if you consider, like, I'm sorry, one more time, 91, is that what you said?
1991, yeah.
91. If you consider what else was coming out around that time, and what it was stacked up against, I have to think that the critics were comparing it to some of its peers, and
That's fair.
like Nirvana was coming out at that time, and it certainly, regardless of how you feel about Nirvana, and I'm not the biggest Nirvana fan in the world, but it was certainly um, something that was a comparison piece, I think, to that. Like there were probably people that said, well, it's not Nirvana, and it wasn't Nirvana. Like Nirvana certainly was more popular and more critically acclaimed. But in my opinion, I agree with you 100%. Like that album is really good, very underrated, and I'm glad to see that they sort of got their due after their follow up, Throwing Copper, came out, because that one just went catastrophic. That one went off the charts for them. And we did we only see them once? Because I know I've seen them about 8 times. I had to open up my concert spreadsheet to double check, but
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we saw him up at Deer Creek. I think we only saw him once though.
okay. All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that, but I mean, what a great live band. And seeing them on the Throwing Copper tour was especially cool because that was only their second album at the time. So they had to play a bunch of songs from their first album, which
Oh
was,
yeah.
so we got to hear a bunch of those songs, which was really cool.
So, all right. What do you got for number 4, sir?
All right. So my number 4 will probably be the most obscure, certainly the least on my list of, at least on my top 5, it's going to be the least well known, but not unknown. This is the newest album on my list, coming in released in March of 2000. This artist is somebody who I've absolutely fallen in love with ever since this album came out, and I got introduced to it. And he's put out a handful of albums, but I really love what he does sonically, in terms of how he produces his albums, and him as a songwriter. And his name is Pete Yorn. And his debut album was called Music for the Morning After. And oh man, to this day, it's just still so important to me. And like we've talked about, like a lot of the music on this list is important to me, and I'm sure to you, because of the time that it came out, and the things that we were going through in our lives. And when this came out, I was really trying hard to get into new bands, and sort of expand my taste. And this is, I suppose, what would have been considered somewhat alternative back then, but by today's standards, that's kind of a goofy category to put anybody in. But I really loved the way it sounded. I loved the acoustic slash electronic feel that it had to it. Pete was raised in New Jersey, and he grew up listening to like Springsteen and Bowie and the Smiths. And I think if you know any of those bands, you can hear a lot of that in his music on that first album. But it felt very calculated and very polished for a debut album. And to this day, probably in the top 3 of my favorite debut albums of all time. He wrote and recorded all the songs and played every instrument on the album. He had various producers and people walking him through it. But I mean, he had so much good music at the time. One of my favorite songs is a song called New Enough to Know Nothing at All. And that didn't even make the cut of the album. That ended up a B-side that he would release later when he re-released the album in a deluxe package. So he had such great music, and was a good songwriter. He's one of those songwriters that isn't very obvious about what he's talking about. Like, you listen to the lyrics and you can't necessarily pick apart what was going on specifically in his life, but you knew it was pretty heavy, and that there was some real interesting context behind it. And my favorite part about Pete Yorn is the fact that he's a pretty small artist in terms of, he's not super popular. He's had songs in a bunch of movies, so he's gotten some exposure that way. His brother's name is Rick Yorn, and I believe he's actually a kind of a big time Hollywood producer. So I'm sure that's helped get his songs in movies. But I've met Pete a couple times, and got my picture taken with him and autographs and chatted with him. And he's a super cool, down to earth kind of guy, and which obviously makes my passion for him and his music all the more strong. So yeah, Pete Yorn, that's my number 4.
Yeah, didn't he have? You mentioned movies. He had a couple tunes, 2 or 3 on the soundtrack for what's that Jim Carrey movie with Renee Zellweger?
Myself and Irene. Yep.
Yeah.
Which I believe his brother was involved in. I believe he may have produced that movie or had something.
Oh, is that right?
So,
okay.
So there's probably some nepotism or some sort of family advantage that he got from that. But if you look up the songs that he had in movies, there's quite a few of them, and it's pretty impressive. Yeah, it's a good list. I would highly recommend it. I know it's I won't say it's acoustic in the same sense that you like, but I know that that you take notes in these podcasts when you hear about songs and stuff you don't know. Give that one listen. If you don't like it after one listen, then put it down and don't worry about it. But I think that you might really grab onto some of the stuff there. So give that one a shot.
All right, I can do that. I can do that. All right. All right. So number 3 for me. This might be, if there's going to be an overlap, this would be the one, I think, in our top 5. It is from March 24th, 1986. It's by a little band called Van Halen, and it is 5150.
Okay, all right.
I think we've chatted about it on a previous episode. Again, this is the one that I could do this with most Van Halen albums, but you put it in, you hit play, and it just goes. And for me, it's like kind of one song after another, and it's almost like an opera in a sense that it kind of goes together very well in my mind. It builds on itself. It tells a story. Again, in my mind, I don't know if that's by design, but everything. Sammy, it's the first album with Sammy Hagar at the helm. Sammy's all about love. Sammy's all about having fun. And I think we mentioned that Live Without a Net album where you could just tell those guys are having fun playing those songs. And, that was one of my first introductions to this particular album, and I just fell in love with it, and I have never put it down. I listen to that album regularly, all the way through, all the time. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm the last person in the world that's going to criticize you for that choice for obvious reasons. The it's an interesting album because it's the first time that Van Halen really lets to sort of, or it's the first album they really get to spread their wings, right? Because I think historically, anybody who knows Van Halen knows this is the first album with Sammy, and the first one without David Lee Roth. And David Lee Roth was a great frontman, but in terms of vocal prowess, that wasn't really his specialty.
mhm.
And Sammy, whether you like Sammy or not, whether you buy into his shtick, his rock and roll Jimmy Buffett vibe or whatever, the guy can sing. I mean, to this day, he's 73 years old, maybe 70. Yeah, I think 73, and he's incredible. He's one of the best lead singer. He's one of the best rock vocalists that has ever walked this planet, and I will fight anybody who argues with that.
Yeah.
And Sammy joining the band at this time really allowed them to play different music. I mean, for those that don't know too much about music, like there's a standard tuning for a guitar, and it's E, A, D, G, B, E. Those are the tunings for the individual strings. Well, when Dave joined the band, or from the day one that Dave was in the band, they had tuned down a half a step because Dave didn't really have the vocal range to sing high. Sometimes that's an artistic choice because songs that are tuned down a half a step have a darker kind of more metal, quote unquote, vibe to them. But Sammy was the opposite. I mean, Sammy had the voice to do whatever he wanted. So as soon as Sammy got in the band, this was the first album where Eddie got to tune up to standard tuning, and it just blew the roof off of it. I mean, it sounded so bright and so explosive from beginning to end. And I know that Eddie really loved that because he really got to explore the music of it all a lot more, whereas with Dave it was more limited. So yeah, I mean, it's the funnest album I've ever listened to from top to bottom. It's absolutely fantastic. So
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
very obviously a great choice.
again, five singles from that album. Why Can't This Be Love, Dreams, Love Walks In, Best of Both Worlds, and Summer Nights. Again, I mean, that to me is the kind of the consummate summer album, right? It's
Yes.
fun. It is, put the windows down, take the sunroof, open the sunroof and just go, right? It's just a fun album. I love it.
It's funny you should say that because I'm sort of weird about what albums I listen to at what times of the year.
Uh-huh.
And much like Hysteria, 5150 is not an album that I would listen to much in the wintertime because
Right.
it just doesn't. I need the vibe to be right, and the vibe for me for 5150 is driving in your car with the windows down and just screaming at the top of your lungs out of your car, very very off key. Word for word everything that's going on there, and that's what it means to me. And I can't do that in the wintertime, so I don't even try. I'm like, nope. When it comes to Def Leppard or Journey or Van Halen or all those great 80s rock bands, like we'll put those on the shelf until the sun comes back out.
Cool. All right. What do you have for your number 3, sir?
All right. Well, my number 3. Now, this number 3 and number 2, man, they're so close to being interchangeable. And for the longest time, this was my number 2, but it's been downgraded, but only by a hair. This one was released at the end of May in 1967. It was supposed to be released on my birthday, but got released a little bit early. This was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles.
Yep.
This is where the feels really start to kick in for me, and the list of albums that I have. It was produced by George Martin, who very famously produced all of the Beatles albums. It's a really interesting. It's known for being an interesting mix of rock and roll, psychedelia, and sort of the hippie culture. The band was famously, experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs and things like that at the time. So this album is one of those albums where I feel like if our parents were Beatles fans from like the early 60s, this is where they fell off, right? Because shit got weird. I mean, shit got really weird around this time. And Paul McCartney had this concept once he started taking LSD. He sort of created an alter ego for the band, and And his idea was this band called Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band would be their album. This would be their performance record. And so they just took that and they ran with it, and they had a lot of very crazy, very weird, very different kind of sounds on this album. Like the first song, Sergeant Pepper, kind of starts off and it sounds like a live track. It sounds like it was recorded live, and then it very seamlessly goes into with a little help from my friends, and it's just so good. It was heavily influenced by the Pet Sounds album by the Beach Boys. But for me, like the reason this made this list is because it's very nostalgic for my time living in the dorms on Teeter Thompson 5 in Bloomington, Indiana, 1994. So our old RA, Chris Foss, was the one that introduced me to this album. And I remember being at Target in Bloomington and buying this thing and taking it back and just listening to it, because it was one of the first albums that I listened to that I thought had weird, quote unquote, weird songs on it. I remember just on repeat, constantly listening to this. And I swear to God, I can still smell the dorms when the first few notes of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds come on. And that's not a drug reference. That's not a pot thing or a weed thing. That's just, I just remember being there. I just remember how important that was and how it time-stamped that time of my life. And the most interesting thing I read about this when I was kind of trying to get more information on it was that this song, or this album had, I mean, from front to back, it's amazing. It's almost flawless. It was supposed to have Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever on it, but
was it really?
Neither one of those songs actually appeared on the album, but they wrote both of those songs for this album. They as in the record company and George Martin, decided to release this a couple months ahead of time as a double A-side single. So these were never officially part of an album. They were released as basically a single instead of a B-side single. It was 2 A-sides. And then when Sgt. Pepper came out, they felt like, because of the way that the singles didn't really sell, they didn't feel like they could put them on the album. But I cannot imagine how fucking successful and how amazing and how revered this album would be if it actually had those 2 songs, which are 2 incredibly popular Beatles songs on it. So that was really interesting. And George Martin, I think, famously said that he is one of his biggest regrets of his career is that he didn't fight harder to put those 2 songs on that album. But,
wow.
I mean, it's to this day, I still listen to it frequently, and it's just amazing. It really takes you back and transports you to a different time, for sure.
Yeah, I have, obviously I have very similar memories of the dorms and Chris with this album, because I know he loved this album. One of his favorite songs obviously was Lovely Rita. His wife is Rita. And yeah, this is, a lot of people talk about, when you're talking about kind of your favorite Beatles albums, it's the White Album or I always suggest Sgt. Pepper. Like, this is the album. And it's interesting what you said about, if our parents were fans of the Beatles, this would be where they fell off. I mean, again, this is where they came to life in my mind, right? It has nothing to do with drugs, right? Because I've never done any of those drugs, so it's not that, right? But it's this is, to me, this is the Beatles. This, obviously there's a couple songs that are probably more iconic, but again, to me, this is the Beatles. Yeah, great pick.
Yeah, but they have some really iconic songs off of this album. I mean, you just read through the track listing, and it's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, or It's a Day in the Life, or With a Little Help from My Friends. I mean, it's so great. It's from top to bottom. It's really, really great.
Great, good pick. Okay. So number 2 for me, and this is where I started looking at the dates of all of these. And, I've got, 2012, I got 1991, I got 1986. This is from October 5th, 1992. I think this is, what this has really told me is, at this time in my life, the mid 80s through the mid 90s, that has kind of really what shaped my, what I love about music, right? Again, this is This is a very lyrics, again, in my mind, is a very lyrics intensive album. But it is a little, there are some songs on here that are folksy. There are some songs though that are a little bit harder. It is Automatic for the People by REM. This album, again, my criteria was, kind of set it and forget it, put it on and just kind of listen to it the whole way through. I mean, it starts out with Drive and goes right into Try Not to Breathe and then Sidewinder Sleeps Tonight. My least favorite song on this album is probably Everybody Hurts, which may have been the most critically acclaimed song on this album. It's probably my least favorite song. My favorite song on here, I think, is Night Swimming, which is a relatively slow melodic piece. But this, again, I mean, there's a lot of really good, solid REM albums, but again, this one to me is the one that you can put on and just kind of set it and forget it. This one actually was ranked number 249 on the Rolling Stones 500 greatest of albums of all time, which, not that I'm looking for for anybody else to kind of agree with me, but it just goes to show that, this is one of those albums that is, I think, kind of universally recognized as just an all around tight, really, really, really good album. They did come out with a 25th anniversary edition, and there's a couple outstanding live, I don't know that they necessarily played the album through and through, but just kind of live renditions of all of these songs. I still think they play several of them, late into the career. They were still playing a lot of these songs. And again, it's just, I wouldn't even say that I'm the biggest REM fan in the world, but this album just really kind of struck a chord with me and has stuck with me for a lot of years.
This one's an interesting choice. I think that some people underestimate the impact that REM had on the world of music at this time. Like they were huge, like they were monsters. Even before Losing My Religion became a big thing. REM was sort of like that it band, that college band. They sort of defined, I think, at the time what people were calling college rock. And this album, I'll admit that I'm not overly familiar. I'm not the biggest REM fan either, but REM is one of those bands that when you find that song, whatever that song is for you, it's easy to sort of attach yourself to it and give it meaning and let it be your soundtrack for whatever. For me, it's interesting that it's this album because this probably has my absolute favorite REM song on it, but it's not one that you mentioned. It's called Sweetness Follows. And the reason that song came across my radar was because it was featured on the Vanilla Sky soundtrack, which I might be one of the few people who really like that movie. But it featured a lot of really great songs. And this was one of them. And Sweetness Follows is just so, I don't know what the word is. And I've always tried to really grasp the word, but I mean, it just feels so surreal. Like there's something about that. It's very dreamlike. It's very wispy. I don't know what the right word is, but like when I hear it, I feel like I'm in a dream, and I feel like that's sort of the soundtrack of whatever's happening in that dream. And it's such a great song. And Night Swimming, again, that one is fantastic too. That one's probably my second favorite on that album. Man on the Moon's okay, like that was their radio hit, I think, from that one of their bigger ones anyways. Next to Drive, probably. Well, Everybody Hurts. I mean, that one's a little bit unfairly pigeonholed just because it is sort of a really Debbie Downer wah kind of sound.
It's the emo I'm in love song, right? Everything sucks, everything.
Right. Which is ironic because they're major chords, like it's not a minor chord song. Like it's actually, they use major chords in it. So they use the happy chords, but they make a really sad sounding song, which is really interesting. I always had an appreciation for bands that could write a happy sounding song, but it was actually a really, really, sad lyrically. But this one was, I don't know, that was an interesting one for sure. But that's a good choice. I think that they were a huge band when we were in college, and
it's I mean, you're right. I think the other thing that you touched on there, I do think that they are especially historically, I think they're kind of overlooked because when they became, you know, ultra popular, right? It was at this time when grunge started, right? The Nirvanas and the Pearl Jams of the world and those kind of things, and music was kind of changing, and REM really never did that, right? They were always a yeah, college rock kind of poppy. They were certainly a progressive band, but if you go back and you listen to the older REM stuff, they really didn't. And this is to their credit. They certainly changed as a band, but it's an REM song from that for their entire catalog, and
Sure.
that's not just Michael Stipe's voice, right? But that's them the whole time. They've got a
Oh,
very
yeah.
signature sound, and it's great.
Yeah, it's Mike Mills, it's Peter Buck, it's Bill Berry. Like, it's a very it's a very patented type sound, and that's what makes them really great for sure.
Yeah. All right, we're getting down to it. What is
All
your
right,
number
all right. Number two. So this number two again could have been interchanged with my number three. It probably made its way to number two because of its recent re-release. Originally released back on November 1st, back in 1994. This is the seminal Wildflowers album by Tom Petty. Tom Petty, I mean, I probably talk about him enough on this podcast, but he has grown to become probably, I mean, Van Halen is obviously one that I talk about a lot. He's probably my second favorite artist of all time at this point. Um, and this is the album. This is the one that I've been waiting for since 1994, that they would re-release and remaster and put out all those extra songs. So this was actually, interestingly enough, produced by Rick Rubin, who by 1994 had made his name by producing the Beastie Boys and Run DMC, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Eventually, Johnny Cash, he did some work with him. I think that was later in Johnny Cash's career. But this album was so impactful to me. And I remember the first time I really heard any of the songs, I was at Purdue, ironically enough, visiting some high school friends there, and somebody was playing this. I'm like, what is this? Like, I guess I knew that it was Tom Petty, but it didn't sound like Tom Petty. It didn't sound like a Tom Petty record by any means. Interestingly enough, this was his second solo album, again, quote unquote, but that's kind of misleading because all of the Heartbreakers played on it, with the exception of his drummer Stan Lynch, and this would essentially be the departure of Stan Lynch, and Petty would find his new drummer Steve Ferroni, who would play on this album, and he would eventually get the the job as the drummer in the Heartbreakers going forward. It also featured Kenny Aronoff, who, many people may not know him by name, but Kenny Aronoff is sort of like one of the most popular session drummers that is out there. He's played with Elton John and Bon Jovi and Melissa Etheridge, and he actually attended the Indiana University School of Music
Oh,
and
nice.
graduated, I think, the year we were born. So he's a little bit older, but he's played with everybody, anybody and everybody. Kenny Aronoff is, if you saw his picture, you'd probably recognize him. He also sort of got famous with John Mellencamp as well. It features Carl Wilson from the Beach Boys, who did some backup vocals, and some guy named Ringo played drums on one of the tracks. But the interesting thing about this album is that aside from a few bangers, this is a really melancholy acoustic feel to this record.
Yeah.
It was about the time that Tom's marriage with his first wife was dissolving, and they would end up divorcing 2 years later. And I think he talked a little bit about it in his book, that I think it was around this time where there was some drug abuse that I feel like wasn't widely known until his book came out. That kind of started around this era, around this time frame. But the interesting thing is that I think he's such an interesting songwriter, in that he kind of treats himself as the vessel. Like, this stuff just all comes to me, and then I just kind of put it out into the world. Like, I'm not creating this. I'm just the guy who's sort of filtering all of it. And the song Wildflowers, the lyrics go, you belong somewhere you feel free. And it wasn't until very many years later that he realized that he wrote that about himself, which I thought was really interesting and really introspective, that he didn't even really understand it. But he was in a marriage that was falling apart, and he was basically writing himself a song without even understanding that. Uh, Interestingly enough, it was supposed to be a double album, but the record studio kind of talked him out of doing that because double albums are never really moneymaker albums. Like they don't typically generate a lot of revenue. So they talked him into consolidating it into a single package. But recently, the reason I mentioned that it's recently on my list is because it was re-released as a package called Wildflowers and All the Rest, which featured 10 additional songs that were supposed to be a part of this double album,
Oh, okay.
as well as home recordings of basically demos of all these songs, alternate takes and live cuts of all the songs that ended up making up this album. So I bought like I'm collecting records again, and I bought a package. It was like 9 records of this album, right? And only 2 of those actually encompass the original album, and the rest of it is all the bonus material of all the stuff that he meant to put out at the time. So, long story short, too late. Tom Petty's Wildflowers is just one of the greatest albums ever. It meant so much to me, and it's continued to mean something to me over the years and all this time.
Very cool. It's funny. I almost put a Tom Petty album on my list. I would have gone with Full Moon Fever, but I can totally see why you would, why you're drawn to Wildflowers as well. I'm Tom Petty. When we lost him, man, that was not a good day, obviously.
That was tough. That was really tough. Like I will admit that I actually cried, and that was another one of those, like, we had the Eddie Van Halen conversation about how impactful that was, even though I didn't know the guy, I wasn't friends with him, he wasn't like my uncle or anything. I was so moved by the fact that he was gone, and the same thing happened with Tom Petty. I sat at my desk at work and I cried because I was so distraught about, at the time, like, he had not had a chance to put together this package, and this was the next thing that he had announced that he was going to work on, was redoing this Wildflowers album.
Okay.
And I think it's commonly regarded by a lot of his fans as his greatest opus, like his best work. And the fact that he didn't get a chance to come back and do this himself the proper way, really sort of made things harder. But like when he died, like it crushed me. Like I was in the height of my fandom at the time, and I was brokenhearted for sure. But okay, well, that's it. Wildflowers by Tom Petty, fantastic.
All right.
Anybody who's listening to this hasn't checked that out, please listen to the extra songs and the deluxe package of that, because it's fantastic. But without further ado,
All right.
tell us your number 1 pick.
My number 1, my favorite album of all time, released on February 28th, 1989. It is an album that anytime I'm with my buddies and I start talking about favorite albums, I catch a rash of shit every single time I talk about this album. And I don't care. I will defend it to the death. It is the self-titled Indigo Girls album.
Wow, your number 1.
I love this album. To this day, I play it regularly. It is I know I catch a lot of shit for it. The Indigo Girls, if you're not familiar, they're just they're a folk rock duo, right? They're from Atlanta, Georgia. This is actually their second studio album, but it's the first one kind of released on a major album or a major record label. It is, again, I can't really describe it. It's a very acoustic album, the entire thing. It's very, the lyrics really speak to me. There's a lot of songs on here where, to your point earlier, they represent a time and a place in life. Music for me kind of gets me through a lot of really difficult spots in life. I went to school 6 hours from my girlfriend, who was my high school sweetheart. You of all people know that better than anybody. And this album got me through a lot of hard times, right? And still to this day, there are times when I'll go and I'll just put it on, and it takes me back and it relaxes me. And we're living through a world of a rash of shit these days, right? And this is one of those albums that I can kind of put on and I can relax and it'll take some of my stress away. I remember like it was yesterday when the first time I heard this album, um, I was, and in fact, I mentioned Dan earlier when we were talking about the live Mental Jewelry album. I was actually at his house on a New Year's Eve with his older sister and her friends, and they were playing this album, so presumably they had already heard it. And, I don't know if they were in college at the time or what have you. They were probably 5 or 6 years older than us. And rather than, watch Dick Clark, or rather than play the games that we were playing, or rather than drink or whatever we were doing, I was literally just enthralled listening to this album. And it kind of, it made a mark on my soul, and to this day it sticks. And like I said, it's not the hippest or coolest choice, but it is my favorite album of all time.
Well, that's fantastic. I have no qualms with that whatsoever. And by the way, the second time that REM ends up on your list, because
Exactly right.
both
Yep.
all members of REM take turns playing on this album or singing or whatever.
They do. Yeah.
This is good, and I own this album as well. Admittedly, it's been a while and probably way too long since I've listened to this album, but it is the Indigo Girls were a group that, or was a group that they they were a huge part of a lot of some of our friends in college like lived around this group, right?
Yeah.
Like they were so tightly wound around a lot of the music interests of the girls that we knew at the time. And there weren't a lot of guys that listened to the Indigo Girls,
No.
for sure.
Yeah.
Not at all. But this album was fantastic. It was really, really good. And the songwriting is really where they excel, right? Like you listen to this album and you can tell that it's put together by people who are very thoughtful and trying to send a message and tell a story, and that's a real strong choice for sure.
Yeah. So, like I said, I always catch shit for it, but I will defend it every single time.
Yeah, no, I'm not for me. I think that's a great choice. It's a surprising one, to be honest. I
Yeah.
did not expect it, but I know that this one has always been near and dear to your heart, so I think that that's great.
All right. What do you
Um,
got, sir?
All right, so my number one is not going to be super surprising. It also came out on March 24th in 1986, and it is also 5150 by Van Halen.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sure for all two of the people who listen to our podcast, they're probably sick of hearing us talk about Van Halen, but I guess I don't really care. This album is the most, I don't know, I don't know how to describe it other than I've often said that there's no bad mood that Van Halen can't dig me out of, and this album is you know the most powerful of all of them. It's so much fun and it's so bright and it's so exciting. And from the minute that Sammy says "Hello, baby," and the album just kicks in, it just punches you in the face and just keeps punching until the album's over. And it's so good and it's so much fun. It's just fun. Like I can't describe it any other way. Produced by Don Landy and Mick Jones. Mick Jones, fame from being the Foreigner guitarist. Um, I think he was mostly credited for helping Sammy with his vocals. Not helping, that's probably the wrong word, but coaching on his vocals because Sammy was a fantastic vocalist, especially in the mid '80s. This was the first number one album that the band ever got on the Billboard 200 chart. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, every album that they did with Sammy, they only did four in total, four studio albums, and every one of those albums hit number one on the charts. And this was the first time that any of their albums had ever hit number one. It was the seventh album for the band, but like we mentioned before, it was the first one with Sammy Hagar. Interestingly enough, and I didn't think about this until I did my research, it's the first Van Halen album that didn't have an instrumental on it, which Eddie was really famous for.
Yeah.
Like first one had Eruption, second one had Spanish Fly, and then Women and Children first had, I'm not going to remember that one. Fair Warning had Sunday Afternoon in the Park. Diver Down had Cathedral. 1984 had 1984. This is the first one that didn't have an actual instrumental. So that, and we wouldn't see another one until the Foreign Lawful Carnal Knowledge album,
Yep.
because we didn't get one on 0812 either. But
you got
this is the one that actually has my least favorite song on it. It's The Inside. It's such a junky throwaway song. I mean, it's fun. And the thing that I will give it credit for is that it's very representative of what that band was going through at the time.
At the time, yeah.
They were all best friends to the point where, I mean, that's like the 9th song on the album. Like, it's not a long album, right? That's like, it's not even 10 songs, is it?
No.
9th or 10th song. I don't remember, but it's the last song on the album, and it's easily a throwaway, but the other songs are fantastic. I'm not as big of a fan of Why Can't This Be Love? I'm sort of take it or leave it on that one. But the songs that aren't popular on that are the best ones. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
With the title track being my number one favorite Van Halen song of all time. 5150 is so great. And when you listen to Sammy belt out those vocals on that track, it is something else. It is a religious experience. Like, that guy just kills it. And when you see it on Live Without a Net, it makes it even better. It's just insane, but good enough. And Best of Both Worlds and Summer Nights and shit, what's the third song? Or wait,
Dreams.
Well, no, there's Dreams. There's the first song is it Good Enough? Shit, now I'm
Good Enough is one. Yeah.
Good Enough is one, and then it's
Why Can't This Be Love? Get Up. Dreams.
Get Up. That's it. So Good Enough and Get Up, the songs that didn't really get any play, like, those are the ones that are the real gems on this album. And 5150, and of course, Love Walks In is one of the ballads, is fantastic. It's so good. I mean, it's super fucking cheesesteak, but it's so good. And you know, Eddie's solo and his synthesizer playing, like, I like how he kind of brought the synthesizer over, but said, hey, I'm not going to overdo it on this album. I mean, he did it a little bit, but he didn't overdo it. But it's so great. It means it so much to me. It was, I don't remember when I got this or what in what order. I know that Balance was the first album I got, and I think this was either the second or third. It would have been either Van Halen one, or this one would have been my second one, and I don't remember which one. But to this day, I still listen to it for any pick me up that I ever need, and it's just fantastic. Summer Nights, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's so good, and you can tell these guys were having so much fun. It just permeates through that whole record.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I mean, I obviously it's in my top 5. Like I said, if there was going to be one overlap, that was going to be the one, and I'm thrilled that it was the one, because it's a great.
I don't know if there's a music list we're ever going to be able to create that won't have some sort of Van Halen something on it, right?
Probably not. Not. No.
You know, that's what it is.
All right. So let's see. We got a couple honorable mentions. I have 2. I was able to narrow it down to 2. This I have one that we'll call it a little bit of a cheat, because it is a live album. We were texting before we started broadcasting, and we said, hey, should we disqualify live albums because they really are greatest hits? And we decided no, we won't. So this one is from September 8th, 2009. It is Live from Atlanta by Jacko Pierce.
Okay, all right.
Jacko Pierce is a band. It's probably not very well known. I know you know them very well, but it's 2 guys. They are the kind of the quintessential college band, right? They're 2 guys from Austin, Texas that met and have made a career out of being 2 guys in a band, right? It's Jack O'Neill and Carrie Pierce. I've actually had the pleasure of seeing Carrie Pierce live in person. I've never seen the band. I've actually met Carrie, awesome dude. Again, acoustic music, lyrical music, depending on who wrote the songs. Jack is a little bit more gruff and a little bit more serious about the songs he writes. Carrie is more kind of upbeat and happy-go-lucky and those kind of things. But when you put those guys together, they make some incredible music. And this album was kind of the precursor. I guess they they had just recorded their first album in, God, quite some time. It had probably been 10 or 12 years. The name of the album was Promise of Summer, and they recorded this live in a band in a venue called Eddie's, I think, in Atlanta. And I've never been there, but just based on hearing it, it sounds very similar to like what the Bluebird would sound like, right? Just like kind of this little, shit bar that might hold a couple hundred people, two guys on a stage. There was a band in college that we used to go see called Mike and Joe or Michelangelo. Reminded me a lot of what these guys might sound like. So I love it. That album I've listened to countless times. I listen to it all the time on road trips. It's the one. If anybody ever wants to know Jacko Pierce, that's kind of the one that I point him to.
So funny because when we were talking before this and we talked about the whole, should we put a live album on here? I guessed that you were going to put Jacko Pierce on here, but I didn't guess this album. I thought it was going to be their first live album, which was it Back from the Americas or something like that?
Yep.
And so I was wondering when Jacko Pierce was going to end up on your list because I thought it was inevitable. That album though is good. It's a really good one because it encompasses all of their great songs to that point in their career. And again, people who listen to this podcast are probably sick of hearing this, but I mean, this is another band that you turned me on to, and that we listen to quite a bit. But this album is good because their first live album was really really good, but it was really short in terms of like it only had like 7 or 8 songs on it. But it only encompassed obviously all the songs that they'd written to that point. But your album, this one had obviously there had been more time and they got to cover a lot more of their material. So I think it was more all encompassing of their discography, if you will. So yeah, that was a really good one. And Jacko Pierce is a fantastic band that if people don't know, they should definitely go check out, especially some of their older works. It's really good stuff for sure.
Yep. All right, what do you got, sir?
So all right, well, I guess I'll sort of follow suit there. I also have a Jacko Pierce album in my honorable mentions.
Nice.
It's Bringing on the Weather. It has to be Bringing on the Weather. It's not a live album, but it is the studio album that sort of introduced me to this band. And like you have said for a while now, it's very acoustic. It's very sort of college rockish, but it's got such a vibe to it that I just can't even describe to people. And maybe I'm just sort of conjuring all this because we spent countless nights coming home from the bars, half in the bag or maybe at least 75 to 90% in the bag. And we'd sit at home, we'd sit in our condo and we'd play World Series baseball 94 and we'd listen to Bringing on the Weather, like front to back all the time. And it was just, I don't know, it was so magical at that time. And I still think to this day, if you like acoustic music, it has a great vibe to it and a great sound. It was produced by T-Bone Burnett, who has been responsible for a lot of really, really great albums. I think famously Robert Plant and Alison Krauss, that album, he's done that for them. He's done a lot of stuff for the Bodines, which the Bodines are a big, big favorite of mine. Probably should have ended up on this list somewhere if I had my druthers, but no, this album is really, really great, and sets a very, very specific mood that you may not always, be ready for. But when you are, it's amazing, and I still listen to it this day. If I could get this album on vinyl, it would complete my life. But I don't know if they're ever going to put it out. I don't think it was ever available originally on vinyl. But man, would I really love that?
Yeah,
Bringing on the Weather.
It's a great album. I'm pretty sure. God, when was that album released?
I want to say 90. It's interesting because it doesn't even have its own Wikipedia page,
right?
Because they're that not popular. But,
right. You know what? I might have bought that album. Let's see.
94, April of 94. That's when it came out.
April of 94.
I was right on that.
You know what? I might have bought that album. No, I don't know if that could be true or not. I was gonna say I might have bought that album the same day I bought the Mental Jewelry album. I might, you know what? I might have, because that trip. Let's see, I graduated. I graduated. What would that have been, like May? And then yeah, so I might have bought that album the same day I bought Mental Jewelry. Um, and again, just kind of fell in love with it. Um, and you know what's funny? A lot of these albums and a lot of these songs, we've mentioned it, bring you back to a specific time in life,
Hmm.
but they also, as you grow in life and as you have new experiences, you get to experience that music in a different manner. There's a song on that album called Jacob that, when you have children and you listen to that song, it takes on a completely different meaning, or at least it did for me. And I guess that's the beauty of music, right? It's like it kind of hits you where you are in life. And that's really what makes a great album. So, anyways,
Yeah,
great.
that Jacob song is got a very Cats in the Cradle kind of vibe to it.
Mhm.
But much like Sergeant Pepper takes me back to the dorms,
Yeah,
Jacko Pierce takes me back to 406 North Lane.
yeah.
That is the place where that just was ingrained into my love of music forever, and it's nice. Like that's 406 for me is Jacko Pierce for
Good
sure.
to be back. Yeah, nice. All right, so I've got one last honorable mention. It is a 1990 album, March 20th, 1990. It's an album called "I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got," and it's by Sinead O'Connor.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
this album, I would imagine, is probably most well known for probably my least favorite song on the album. And that's "Nothing Compares to You," which was just a mega huge hit. It was actually written by Prince, and then Sinead O'Connor, I think, made it famous. I don't think Prince ever recorded it
He
prior to that.
did. Yeah,
Oh, did he?
he did, but he didn't. It wasn't. I can't remember if it was just recorded and released and didn't go anywhere, or if he waited to release it.
Okay.
But there is a version of it for sure.
Yeah. So, but this is the song that kind of made Sinead O'Connor, right? And but again, there's 10 songs on the album. I think it might be my least favorite song. And again, that's not to say that it's not an amazing song, because it is. Sinead O'Connor actually, her vocals are really, really strong, and she's just got a powerful, powerful voice. She's, an Irish singer. And if you don't, I'm sure you know her. She's this kind of bald chick that has gone on to, she had all sorts of issues on Saturday Night Live and all sorts of things. But she's an amazing songwriter, singer. I think my favorite song on that album is probably it's probably a song called "Black Boys on Mopeds," which is a song about repression in England and those kind of things. But it's one of those albums. Again, you put it on, you hit play, and you can listen to the whole thing through. And in fact, I was listening to it again tonight as I was prepping for this, and it just kind of reaffirmed that I love this album. It's so good. Also, another one of the albums, I think it's the second one on my list, that it was actually in the Rolling Stones 500 greatest albums. I think it was a 457 or something like that. So
Oh, that's interesting. I one thing that I admire about you is that you have a lot of female artists in your listening repertoire, right? Like it's not all male artists, and that's something I've been trying to work on lately, is to try to expose myself to more female artists. I like Brandy Carlisle, Joni Mitchell, that kind of stuff. Just anything that's out there. I can't say I'm familiar with that album at all, so I
mhm.
can't really comment too much on it. I will say "Nothing Compares to You" is actually a really great song. I imagine that if you don't like that song, you're probably turned off by it for the same reason that I would be for "Pour Some Sugar on Me" or whatever. It's easily the most popular
Sure.
song
Yeah.
on the album, and got an obnoxious amount of airplay, and rightfully so. But after a while, it's like, okay, I've had enough. Um, Prince's version is good. Chris Cornell's version is the best, if you're asking me, pound for pound. He has an acoustic version of that song that will absolutely haunt your dreams for the rest of
Mhm.
your life. Yeah, I mean, I haven't had a chance to listen to that, but I mean, if it's on your list in that respect, then it's something I feel like I should
Yeah,
definitely give it
it's
a
worth
try.
giving it a listen. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So my last pick, my last interestingly enough, both of my honorable mentions were produced by T Bone Burnett. But this is a definitely a different band, but the same time frame. This is the Counting Crows, and it's August and Everything After.
Oh, so good.
August and Everything After. Whew, man, how do I summarize this? It probably deserves to be better than an honorable mention because it was there for me in some very, very impactful moments of my life. At least one or two I won't mention on here, but it is, man, it is such a good album. It is such a moody album, and it is so representative of a time in my life. It just time stamped that point in my
Yeah.
life, right? Like, so Throwing Copper was a big album back in the mid '90s when I got to school, when we both went to Bloomington. And August and Everything After was like a companion piece to that because it was side by side with that the whole time. I was listening to both bands and that album especially, and I'll never forget. And a very um, strong memory is that we had orientation week before we all went to school, right? And that week, or I'm sorry, it wasn't even a week. I think it was a weekend. But we were down for like a weekend, like a week, a month, or a couple weeks before school actually started. So my parents drove me down there, and I'm doing this orientation weekend. I'm staying in a dorm with some random dude driving a Plymouth Duster that I don't even know that guy. I never saw him again. I can't remember. I can't believe I remember what he was driving. Um, but I will never in my life forget the sensation of driving home, leaving Bloomington, right? So like if you come to Bloomington from the north and you drive south and you drive over that big hill and you see that bridge that sort of tells you that you're in Bloomington, right?
And 37, yeah.
I think that's college. That or it turns into college if you
Yeah,
take
I
that
think so.
exit. But anyways, I will never forget driving away from that and kind of looking back, and I'm listening to my Walkman because the first version of this album that I had was on tape, and I'm listening to Perfect Blue Buildings, and I'm watching this as I'm driving away, and I'm thinking to myself, my life is getting ready to begin, right? Because high school was high school. I wasn't the biggest fan of high school, and I think that I understood that it had a lot of limitations as it pertained to my growth as a human being. And when I got to Bloomington, I realized immediately, I'm like, this is going to be a game changer. This is going to change my life forever. And the Counting Crows, that first album became the soundtrack, became a part of my soundtrack for that time in my life. And like I mentioned, it was there through many other important parts of my life as well. And to this day, it's not one that I revisit a lot, but I will say that it's just as important, and it has all the nostalgia and all the feels that it did back then when I listened to it again. With something like Sullivan Street comes on,
Oh,
I mean, it just guts me. It really does. Or um, Anna Begins, or Raining in Baltimore. Oh my God, that song crushes me all the time. It's so good. It's so amazing, and it probably deserves to be higher on my list. But yeah, that's August and Everything After by the Counting Crows. Which, interestingly enough, side note, the most recently released song that they have put out commercially was the title track for that album that they never actually released. So the August and
oh,
Everything After never had a song called August and Everything After, but they had written one. And if you remember the album artwork to
yeah.
that album, it has lyrics in orange and yellow scrawled across the front
That was the
of
lyrics.
the album. The lyrics, that if you read them close enough, they are the lyrics to the song August and Everything After, which was never put on that album. They eventually re-recorded it and released it, and they released it as an exclusive to Amazon Music, so you can't really buy it on iTunes, but it's out there, and you can tell it's got a vibe to it that very much mirrors that, the other songs that were on that album. So
Yeah,
that's my last one.
that's an album that as I was going through this, I'll be honest, I didn't remember. Um, but it's an amazing album, right? I mean, it is. I agree. It takes you right back to that 1994, 1995. Which is again when we graduated from high school, went to college. I think the two or three biggest songs are probably Mr. Jones and Round Here, and maybe Rain King are probably the three songs that probably got the biggest radio play. My favorite song on that album is Omaha. Always has been. Again, just melodically and lyrically, that one really spoke to me. But yeah, that's a great pick. I really struggled with, do I put an album like Pearl Jam 10? Do I put an album like Stone Temple Pilots? Like those kind of things. And those were they were close, but I can totally see why and you look at my list, right? My list is all full of 90s and mid 90s and late 80s kind of stuff. And I think that's the kind of the power of music. It takes you back to a time, and those are the albums. These are the albums that have have really kind of resonated with us over the years. This has been awesome. I'm really glad we did this one.
No, this one was so weirdly cathartic, right? Because we get to talk about. I think I came to the realization while I was going through this list that so much of this, not all of them, if you look at them top to bottom, came from college, but they all come from moments in your life that sort of impact this choice, right? And especially in college, like with the Counting Crows album, or with Tom Petty or something like that, or even Jacko Pierce, like those were such important albums at that time that like they're there forever as far as I'm concerned. Like they don't ever leave. They're all part of my personal history, and that's what makes this really special for sure.
All right. Well, we got through it. We talked a long time, which is awesome, and I don't even care. We're going about an hour and a half. And hey, I hope everybody that's listening to this has enjoyed it. I hope maybe we gave you one or two albums that you'd not heard of before and are worth checking out. We have a boatload of stuff that we're going to be talking about in the upcoming episodes. We put together a little a shared note, and we've got about 20 or 25 episodes on there, topics that we're going to talk about. So we got a lot coming for you in the future. That being said, this is Chewie. I've had a wonderful time, and I've been joined obviously by my friend, Mr. Pip. How are you, sir?
I am great, and I'm jazzed. This was a fantastic podcast, and I can't wait for the next one already.
All right. Have a good one. This has been the 411 from 406. We'll see you guys.
Adios.
All right, bye.